occurred in Singapore a few years ago. An Australian man married a nice Chinese woman from Singapore. Once, while they were visiting family in Singapore, his brothers-in-law were going to the horse racing track for the afternoon and invited him to go along too. He agreed. But before they visited the racetrack, they insisted on stopping off at a renowned Buddhist temple to light some joss sticks and pray for good luck. When they arrived at the small temple, they found it was in a mess. So they got some brooms, a mop and some water and cleaned it all up. Then they lit their joss sticks, asked for good luck and went off to the track. They all lost heavily. That night, the Australian had a dream of a horse race. When he awoke, he clearly remembered the name of the winning horse. When he saw in the Straits Times that there was indeed a horse by that name running in a race that afternoon, he rang his brothers-in-law to tell them the good news. They refused to believe that a Chinese spirit guarding a Singaporean temple would tell a white man the name of a winning horse, so they disregarded his dream. He went to the track. He put a large bet on that horse. The horse won. Chinese temple spirits must like Australians. His brothers-in-law were fuming. What is fear? Fear is finding fault with the future. If only we could keep in mind how uncertain our future is, then we would never try to predict what could go wrong. Fear ends right there. Once, when I was little, I was terrified of going to the dentist. I had an appointment and did not want to go. I worried myself silly. When I arrived at the dentist's, I was told my appointment had been cancelled. I learned what a waste of precious time fear is. Fear is dissolved in the uncertainty of the future. But if we don't use our wisdom, fear can dissolve us. It nearly dissolved the young novice Buddhist monk, Little Grasshopper, in an old television series called Kung Fu. I used to watch this series obsessively in my last year as a schoolteacher, before I became a monk. One day, Little Grasshopper's blind master took the novice into a back room of the temple, normally kept locked. In the room was an indoor pool some 6 meters wide, with a narrow wooden plank as a bridge from one side to the other. The master warned Little Grasshopper to keep clear of the pool's edge, because it did not contain water, but very strong acid. In 7 days' time, Grasshopper was told, you will be tested. You will have to walk across that pool of acid by balancing on the wooden plank, but be careful. Do you see at the bottom of that pool of acid those bones here and there? Grasshopper looked warily over the edge and saw the many bones. They used to belong to young novices like you. The master took Grasshopper out of that terrible room into the sunlight of the temple courtyard. There, the elder monks had set up a plank of exactly the same size as the one over the acid pool, but raised on 2 bricks. For the next 7 days, Grasshopper had no other duties apart from practicing walking on that plank. It was easy. In a few days he could walk with perfect balance, blindfolded even, across that plank in the courtyard. Then came the test. Little Grasshopper was led by his master into the room with the acid pool. The bones of the novices who had fallen in shimmered at the bottom. Grasshopper got up onto the end of the plank and looked round at his master. Walk, he was told. A plank over acid is much narrower than a plank of the same size in a temple courtyard. Grasshopper began to walk, but his step was unsteady. He began to sway. He wasn't even halfway across. He wobbled even more. It looked like he was going to fall into the acid. Then the show stopped for a commercial break. I had to endure those stupid advertisements, all the while worrying how poor little Grasshopper would save his bones. The ads ended, and we were back in the acid pool room, with Grasshopper beginning to lose his confidence. I saw him step unsteadily, then sway. Then he fell in. The old blind master laughed, hearing little Grasshopper splash about in the pool. It wasn't acid, it was only water. The old bones had been tossed in as special effects. They had fooled little Grasshopper, as they had fooled me. "What made you fall in?" asked the master seriously. Fear made you fall in, little grasshopper. Only fear. Fear of public speaking. I was told that one of the greatest fears people have is speaking in public. I have to speak a lot in public, in temples and at conferences, at marriages and funerals, on talkback radio and even on live television. It is part of my job. I remember one occasion, 5 minutes before I was to give a public talk, when fear overwhelmed me. I hadn't prepared anything. I had no idea what I was going to say. About 300 people were sitting in the hall expecting to be inspired. They had given up their evening to hear me talk. I began thinking to myself, what if I can't think of anything to say? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I make a fool of myself? All fear begins with the thought, what if, and continues with something disastrous. I was predicting the future and with negativity. I was being stupid. I knew I was being stupid. I knew all the theory, but it wasn't working. Fear kept rolling in. I was in trouble. That evening I developed a trick, what we call in monk speak a skillful means, which overcame my fear then and which has worked ever since. I decided that it didn't matter if my audience enjoyed the talk or not, as long as I enjoyed my talk. I decided to have fun. Now, whenever I give a talk, I have fun. I enjoy myself. I tell funny stories, often at my own expense, and laugh at them with the audience. On live radio in Singapore, I told Ajahn prediction about the currency of the future. Singaporeans are interested in things economic. Ajahn predicted once that the world